let's talk more about the kind of impacts those activist investors could have on Salesforce. We welcome in Rishi Jaluria. He is RBC Capital Markets software equity analyst. Rishi, thanks for being here. Obviously, you just heard Sas talk about what investors want to hear now from Salesforce and from Mark Benioff. You wrote a really interesting note where you talked about the future of all of the things that have rolled up into Salesforce. And you say Slack actually might not get sold, but some of the other businesses could. Walk us through your thesis on that.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. Look, it's no secret that Salesforce has been a serial acquirer over the past 10, 15 years. And really, in my opinion, they haven't done the best job of integrating a lot of those assets. So I actually do think a lot of their recently acquired very large assets, including Slack, Tableau, MuleSoft, I think all three of those are potentially on the list of assets to divest or sell off. I actually think Slack is a higher probability one because Slack has underperformed. Remember, the architect of the Slack deal was actually Bret Taylor, who's no longer co-CEO of Salesforce. He's left and he's doing his own thing. And I would argue it's not really core to what Salesforce is doing within sales, service, and marketing. So that's actually one that if I think about that, you're automatically improving margins by spinning it off. And you're eliminating what has really been a big distraction of an asset that isn't performing well. But I think Tableau has not been performing well. MuleSoft hasn't been performing well. And by no secret, all three of these are the biggest acquisitions in Salesforce history.
Rishi, do you anticipate anything this week from Salesforce that would clear the deck in terms of all five of these activists? How does Salesforce get rid of them all at once?
Yeah, I don't think there's anything they can do on earnings, right? I think that there's a lot of things that Salesforce needs to do to turn around the business. As you correctly pointed out, it's not just another round of layoffs, although that does seem to be increasingly a possibility at the company. It is turning around the culture. It is leadership changes and leadership stability. There's been a lot of executive churn over the past several months at Salesforce. I think it's more innovation and more at the product level. So really, I as much as I think they are going to guide to like a high single-digit revenue growth number and call it 24% operating margins, which would be nice expansion, I don't think that's going to be enough to clear the deck. I think it needs to have, the activists need to have board representation. They need to have more of a say. And we just see that actual turnaround start to happen at Salesforce, not just, cut heads and improve profitability.
What is Salesforce's kind of recession-resistant product that they do have, or one that they need to generate? Because if you look across the number of clients that they work with, they're looking to trim costs wherever they can right now.
Yeah, I don't think any company, by the way, in software has a recession-resistant product. But if I were to say within the stack rank of order, look, the Service Cloud piece is really important, right? Even during times where customers are looking to cut back on their costs, Service Cloud helps you retain your existing customers, right? That's what they help Salesforce customers do. So that's something that you probably don't want to really unplug or dial back on. Even the core Sales Cloud, right? No one's going to be unplugging it. It's just a matter that you might have fewer sales heads because you've seen the tech layoff numbers happening. Whereas I would say stuff like Marketing Cloud, Slack, maybe to a certain extent Tableau, Commerce Cloud, a lot of those are going to be a lot more recession prone. So if we really kind of disaggregate Salesforce into all these different businesses, Service is probably the most resilient, and then Commerce Cloud, Slack, Marketing probably on the least resilient side.
Rishi, a lot of sources that I've talked to we're familiar with this situation. They say Mark Benioff has really dug in his heels here, and he's taking these activist attacks pretty personally. To that end, does a successful resolution mean that Mark is just a chairman, and who do you see internally that can succeed him as CEO?
Yeah, look, I actually don't think necessarily the only resolution is that Benioff kind of takes a step aside and becomes the executive chairman and focuses on philanthropy and politics. Although I wouldn't be surprised if that is in his future. But I don't know that there's anyone that I've seen internally at Salesforce that is ready to kind of step up to that. It might have to be an external hire to take over that mantle. Now, I'm not familiar with every single person at Salesforce, and it's definitely possible there are people who would be great to take over that mantle. But no one that I've seen so far. But again, I don't think that has to happen, right? If Benioff is willing to go along with some of those changes that the activists propose, especially if it's something that isn't draconian, like cut 20% of the workforce, and it is more about investing and integrating the products, which to me is one of the biggest things Salesforce needs to do to kind of improve their competitiveness, to improve the products, to drive cross-sell, and that all shows up in margins over time.
Why, and coming back to something that you mentioned earlier in them needing to, or perhaps kicking the tires on whether or not they should or could sell Slack, or just spin it off, rather, I should say, I think is what you said. Why would they do that? When they acquired the company for $27 billion, it's a company that's a household name, essentially, for better or for worse. But at the end of the day, it is still a company that has so much brand equity within it that Salesforce is able to benefit from longer term, even through and past this next recession.
Yeah, like from my vantage point, I think just Salesforce hasn't done much with Slack, right? The product is not integrated throughout the rest of Salesforce's products. And then Slack itself is struggling. If you look at the numbers that Slack is putting up, they're not great. And more importantly, like, you are going after Microsoft. And that's the only way Slack can succeed, is you have to invest aggressively. You have to compete against Microsoft with Microsoft Teams. And it's been hard. Microsoft Teams has been, competing incredibly well against Slack. And so if you think about all the time and effort that Salesforce would have to put into Slack to turn around the business, I think they're better off putting those efforts on the core sales, service, and marketing, and improving the products there, being more competitive, fending off the threats from upstarts like HubSpot, rather than spending all this time battling Microsoft, because that's a tough battle. And realistically, over time, I think Salesforce will have to embrace more Microsoft services, especially as the ubiquity of generative AI and ChatGPT becomes more and more front and center.
Really interesting stuff, Rishi. We'll check back in with you, of course, after we get the earnings report and as we get more from Salesforce. Appreciate your time. Rishi Jaluria, RBC Capital Markets software equity analyst, and our Brian Sozzi.